Hi, this is Karen, also known as Caribou or Caribou's Boutique, and I am going to be doing a short series of video tutorials explaining how you can do some simple post work in your rendering workflow. And I have a lot of experience rendering, but this is my very first video tutorial, so I apologize in advance for it being choppy, because it probably will be because I have children and they don't leave me alone for very long, so I'll have to pause. So apologies. Having said that, let's jump on in. This first tutorial is going to focus on DAZ Studio and explaining how you can get out of DAZ Studio the different renders that you're going to need when you go into the post-work process. Before I go any further, it's first of all, a prerequisite for doing the tutorials the way that I am going to do them is that you need the atmosphere camera by Age of Armor available at the DAZ Marketplace. They're an awesome resource for a lot of different reasons, but they're critical. I use them on almost every one of my renders out of DAZ Studio, and you'll see why in a minute. It's also worth noting that most of what I do in post-work you can do natively right inside DAZ Studio, but there's two reasons that I don't. One is that in DAZ Studio, when you're rendering these things natively, they take longer. There's a lot more complexity in the calculations that the computer has to do, so the rendering process just takes a lot longer. And secondly, you don't get the same amount of control. I can change things instantly in post-work and see how they're going to look, change them back and forth very quickly. And again, since some of these techniques take a lot longer to do in DAZ natively, if I have to do, a dozen different test renders, it takes forever, and I am impatient. And as previously mentioned, have small children who don't leave me alone for very long. So I've taken the liberty of rendering our pixie here. There she is ahead of time. And a few notes about the regular sort of raw render here. It's kind of lacks some contrast. It's a little dark, but I've done some of this on purpose. Well, first I added some things in the foreground and there are some things in the background, and I've done that so that at the end we have that nice depth of field blur where the center, the focus of my scene is nice and crisp, but it blurs in and out of there to give us that nice feel of depth, a three-dimensional depth in our scene. But the sort of darkness that I have left in the scene, which I could easily fix with lighting, it just, again, takes longer, lots of test renders. But the reason that I've sort of left it this way instead of too light is that when things are too light, they can get washed out, where it's entirely white and you lose all of the details. And that's much harder to deal with in post-work than an area that's a little too dark. You'll see how that goes in just a little bit. So there are going to be two other renders in addition to this one that I want to take with me into my post-work process. And the first one, and it's kind of a cheater way of doing it here in DAZ Studio. There probably is a way to do just an occlusion render pass, and by all means, if you know how to do that, please let me know, because I do the cheater way here, which is basically to turn everything in the scene white and then rendering it with just your light that has the occlusion set on it. And the purpose of an occlusion render is to just get the shadowing that occurs where two things are very close to each other. These dark areas, like where the armband is close to her arm or the crease in her elbow, those are areas of shadow that I can control in my post-work process. So if I want something to be a little more dark, a little more contrasted, a little more defined, I can do that pretty much with a few clicks. Again, control and speed. The other render that I want to get out of DAZ Studio before I go into post-work is this nice Z depth of field map. And I actually have done this using the Age of Armor atmosphere cameras. And those of you who have maybe used that depth camera say, wait, that's not what it looks like. If you use the depth camera, you actually get a render that's flip-flopped, where the dark things are in back and the white things are up close. But the reason I don't use the depth camera for generating depth maps, ironically, is that there's no transparency. The depth camera picks up geometry, but it doesn't incorporate any of those transparency maps, which makes it difficult to get a realistic looking depth of field blur, simply because in reality, transparent things have that blur behind them and they're not completely crisp. So strangely enough, from Age of Armor himself in one of the DAZ forums, he suggested that instead of using the depth camera, that I use the fog camera. And that's awesome because the fog camera does account for transparency. So here in her wing, you can see the parts of her wing that are nice and dark and the sort of gauzy part, and everything behind it still shows up. And so these are the 3 different renders that I really am going to want to take with me when I move into Photoshop. So let's go ahead and capture that occlusion only pass that we want to use in our Postwork. The reason I do this is that it really helps bring out the contrast in between 2 objects where they're close to each other. It gives a little bit of 3-dimensional pop to the scene. And furthermore, it allows you to adjust that in different places of the scene. So if you don't want it to be quite so contrasty in one part, but you do in another part, it gives you a lot of control over that. Now, some applications have the ability to do just a strict occlusion only render pass, and 3Delight probably has that capability built into it, but I have not been able to find a script or anything to do that easily from within DAZ Studio. However, DAZ Studio does make it very easy to adjust your shaders as a group, and so since we pretty much want everything in the scene white without any color data, we can turn everything white in the scene with a pretty simple process. So first of all, I'm going to go into my scene and I'm going to expand everything so we get all the parts of things, and I'm going to expand it all, select it all, and then over in my Surfaces tab, I'm going to select all of my surfaces. So now all of the items in my scene have all of their surfaces selected, so it makes us easy to adjust everything all at once. We really want to just get rid of the color and the shininess information in all of our shaders. Everything else can stay the same. We don't want to change our opacity, we don't want to change the bump, we don't want to change the displacement, because those things give texture and they have visual qualities that we want to keep in our occlusion pass. To start with, though, we can eliminate all of our diffuse maps. That's pretty much what, gives our objects their colors, are those diffuse maps. If you've ever done texturing, you know what those look like. And we want to make sure that all of our diffuse channels are set at all white and that they're 100% white. Now, right off the bat, you can see this has made a really huge difference. If you were to stop there, though, and to go ahead and jump into your occlusion only pass, you would quickly start seeing that there are things that don't show up in preview that do show up in your render. Specifically, things that are glossy, things that are glowing, and some of the things that have advanced shaders on them. So I want to turn off all of my shiny things. Glossiness, specular. Ambient strength is also another one that I want to turn down because it makes things glow, and they can frequently glow in different colors. We don't want that. Don't change the opacity, don't change bump or displacement. Reflection, no shiny, turn it off. And then we're getting close to the bottom of sort of that standard DAZ shader. I like to set everything, all of the lighting models, to plastic. It doesn't really matter as long as they're the same. Sort of a nice generic look to everything. As I continue scrolling down, you're going to start seeing other parts of other shaders. Remember, we have everything in our scene selected. So as I continue down, I'm going to start seeing the different channels of some of those more advanced shaders. Like she's got subsurface scattering on her skin. You can see that her necklace obviously has some other things going on in there because it's still yellow. So I'm just going to start scrolling down, and any place I see something that looks shiny, specular, turn it off. Specular 2, turn it off. Reflection, turn it off. I can turn off subsurface. You definitely want to leave ray tracing on for all of your materials. Ray trace is needed for that occlusion to be calculated by your render engine, so don't touch that. And then, we're starting to see the reason that my necklace here has got that golden color. Each one of these different channels does something within those pretty cool advanced shaders going on there. So as long as you turn everything white, it's all good. And another quick visual check of the screen as I go down here. It all looks, oops. Let's just turn that off to be safe. But everything looks as it should right now. So we're pretty much done with the surfaces. Now we're going to look at the light that generates our occlusion. One of the lights in your scene, probably either Uber environment or an advanced ambient light, is going to have settings on it to adjust the occlusion. Now, it's worth noting that if you don't have a light in your scene that has occlusion on it, that this is sort of a waste in exercise here, because you need a light that generates the occlusion in order to pick that up. I probably should have started by telling you that. In any event, since my scene does have ambient light that has occlusion set to it, I'm going to turn all the rest of the lights off. I don't need them. We're going to frequently be turning lights off as we do these renders, getting them ready for Postwork. Don't delete the lights. Turn them off. Because in DAZ Studio, if you delete all the lights, you get the default lighting. If you turn them off, it turns black, and that's what we want. Now for this light, we don't want this render pass to be black. We do want this to have our ambient light. And I'm going to go into the light and kind of take a look at it. Right off the bat, I had the light set at a sort of a pale yellow to imitate some sunlight, but I want to make it completely white. Remember, the object here is completely white except for the shadowing. I've already set the occlusion settings that I had for my basic render, the one that had all the color in it, and so I don't need to change any of that. And this is ready to go. Now, the other thing with the advanced ambient light, if you're using that, that's important to note, is the light radius. If your light doesn't extend to the end of the scene, then when you do this, since it doesn't have any color in it, everything is going to turn black. So at this point, I'd be ready to go, except that I know that there's something that I'm going to have to change. But I did this before. But if I go ahead, I'm going to do a quick test render, make it nice and small. And if I start rendering my scene, which this should be all just white with some shadows in it, you'll see kind of right off the bat that as things start to get going with the render, where I would expect there to be white in the background, you can start seeing it pop out already. The very far background is black, and the reason this is happening is because I'm not using Uber environment. I'm using the advanced ambient light, and my sky dome falls outside of that 100-meter radius. So the easiest way to fix this, since it's just the sky dome that falls outside of that, and if you're using the advanced ambient light, you probably won't have anything outside of that because it would be dark in your main render. So I'm going to stop this here, cancel. And in order to make my sky dome white in the background, all I have to do is go back into my surfaces. So there's my sky dome. In the sky dome surface, I'm going to make it ambient. I'm going to add an ambient color to it of white and basically make it glow. It's going to emit white color from it. So if I kind of zip up and down here, there's my ambient. So it actually had the ambient map. The sky dome itself was already glowing that nifty sky color. I'm going to get rid of the sky. I'm going to get rid of the color. And I'm going to change the ambient strength to 100%. So now when I go back into my render, you can see right away that the sky is now white. And as this continues, the only thing that will appear in the render are the things that have the only thing that you're going to see are those shadows between things. You'll start to see the texture coming out really nicely. And I could let this sit here and show you, but I've already done this, and so I am going to stop this render because I've already I've already done this. But you could see that that's how it was supposed to turn out. Now, with everything set just like this, we are ready to roll with the next step of this exercise, which is to generate that depth of field. So in order to create that depth map, we want to pick a camera that is able to not only see how far things are away from the camera, but we also want it to be able to see through things that are transparent, because transparency in our 3D world here is generated by using a map, a texture map, and the depth camera only sees geometry. It doesn't see any of the rest of it. So the depth camera isn't very good for what we need to do, because it can't tell what's see-through and what isn't. The fog camera is perfect for the job that we want, because if you think about looking outside on a foggy day, clearly the distance from your eye is important. Things that are far away are fog colored, and things that are close we're able to see more clearly, which is pretty much what we want to do, especially since, well, fog is see-through, so we can see through the things that are transparent. So I want to go ahead, I guess it helps if I add the camera, and add a fog camera to the scene. And to make sure that we're looking through it the same way as our initial camera, I'm going to copy our main camera and paste it to our fog camera. And now if I go ahead and look through the fog camera, it looks just like it did when we were looking through our main camera. The next step is to, well, first of all, we've already pretty much changed everything in the scene so that it didn't have any shininess or any ambient color. We don't want anything to glow or shimmer. And we've done that already with the exception of the sky dome. As it turns out, it's not incredibly important if I forgot this, because the way that the fog camera works is that things in the back are going to be white, because fog is white. So if I left it white, it's not a big deal. But just to be safe, I'm going to go ahead and turn that ambient strength back down to nothing so that my whole scene is pretty much bland. And then the next step is to make sure that my fog camera is seeing white fog, because I want the back of my scene to be white. So in the fog section of the fog camera, I'm going to change the color of the fog to white. Then I have to turn out the lights, because in turning out the lights, the only thing that the fog camera sees is fog. It is unable to see any of the rest of the scene, because to the fog camera's eye there's nothing else there. If you change the visibility in meters, you essentially change how close to the camera things start to get lost in the whiteness of the fog. So a smaller visibility would make the scene very white very quickly, whereas a larger visibility sets it so that you're able to see more of the scene before it sort of passes through into that white fog. And the good news about this is if you're not entirely sure what you want it to look like, these renders are super quick, because there's no light in the scene, it's just rendering that camera effect. So I'm going to go ahead and render a quick one here, and you see it's really, really fast. And right off the bat, you can instantly see that the back is very white, the things that are closer are not so white, you can see through the transparent parts to the whiteness behind, and these blades of grass that are in the foreground are very black. It's exactly perfect what we want. If I was to change that visibility to something smaller, like maybe a foot, and I render it, you can see that the contrast is much less. You can see less of the scene, so that part with the hill in the background is barely visible through the thickness of the fog. And really, depending on what it is you want to do, you can change that as you need to. The other good news is that I can change this map in Postwork as well. So that's it for the first part of our tutorial. We've generated those 3 different renders, the original render, which is just nice and flat, our occlusion render, which is white except for the shadows, and our depth of field render, which gives us that distance from the front of our scene to the back of our scene. So I look forward to seeing you guys in the next step, which will be stitching this all together in Photoshop. And again, if you're interested in seeing this in Poser, I will have a tutorial up for that as well. Thanks for watching!